Stefano has asked me to say a few words about the conference that will take place in May. And I'm going to speak about the still undiscovered self. In 1959, Jung wrote in a letter to a man named Dr. Carlton Smith in response to an invitation to come to Chicago to give a lecture at the university on the topic of issues of the day. Jung said, why don't you ask the speakers to answer this question? What or who is it that is preventing human beings from living in peace in the world today? And he says, I've given my answer to that question in a book that I wrote and dedicated to you, Mr. Smith. It's called The Undiscovered Self. Here's a copy of the book. Carlton Smith was very eager to get Jung's answer to the question, what's wrong with the world? What are the problems in the world today, and how can we possibly solve them? And Jung was seen as the wise man in Küsnacht, Switzerland, and he was often approached by people for answers to questions like this, big questions. Well, Stefano has sent me a number of questions. I don't know that I'm going to be able to answer them quite at that level, but I think the answer to Jung's question, what is it that prevents human beings from living in peace? The answer to the question is the shadow of ego, egocentricity, selfishness, self-centeredness. And I've written about this and discussed it with many people around the question of the topic, the problem of evil. What is the problem of evil, and how can we approach it and think about it and deal with it? Stefano has sent me a number of questions. One was, the first one was, what era are we living in? I sometimes call it the Umbra Mundi era. There's a shadow over the world. We're living in a dark time. Could call it a dark era. It's an era between other much larger constellations. We're in a betwixt and between era. Jung thought of our period of time as between two ages, Platonic ages, the age of Aquarius and the age of Pisces, and we're in the transition time. So in this Umbra Mundi, it's transitional between two vastly larger periods of time. And these transition times tend to be very difficult and uncertain. It's an age of anxiety. That's been talked about for 100 years already. And the age of anxiety preceded and occurred during the preceded the Second World War and forever after, because of the atomic bomb and the prospect of atomic warfare. So we continue to live in an age of anxiety and uncertainty. We could call it an eclipse. Now, it's a time of debate also and reflection on fundamental values, a crisis of values. So in this era that we're living in, there's a crisis between the ways of organizing societies and governance. Would we prefer autocracy with its single leaders or leadership group, or democracy? That's a basic fundamental question that people are asking today, and it's being debated. There's a competition or dispute about national interests versus globalism, between financial interests versus human interests. So there are many topics and divisions around all these topics. And these divisions and the emotions that they create gives us this atmosphere of crisis that we're living in today. So we can call it an era of liminality, crisis, darkness, umbra mundi. The second question Stefano sent me was, what is happening to democracy? A democracy is a hard-won system of governance that was worked out in the West, beginning in the ancient world in Athens in the 5th century BC for the Common Era. And then after the Middle Ages and Renaissance and the era of kings and emperors, that reemerged in Western Europe, specifically in England. And then there were the revolutions in the 18th century in America and in France that established democracy as a way of life in the Western world. And this has been promoted around the world. Western people have seen it as the best solution to the problems of power and control. And it puts the value and emphasis on the individual rights, the right to speak, the right to think for oneself, and the right to elect our leaders. Now, this is undergoing a serious crisis because people are questioning its value in today's world. The populations are so large. Is democracy an optimal way to control governance and to function effectively in the world that we live in? Or is there a better system of governance? So this debate between the autocrats and the democrats is raging, and it's highly emotional. Now, my feeling is that what is happening to democracy is that it's being put through a process of reflection. I think of this as a kind of alchemical process to analyze, boil down, take apart, look carefully at what is the fundamental value that democracy represents. The way we're living it is a kind of fiction. Mostly our elections are controlled by big money interests and other vested interests. We're subject to propaganda. We think we are living in democracies when actually we're being manipulated. So what is democracy really? What are its fundamental values? And can we lift those up and refine them and distill them in a kind of alchemical process to come to an essence, an aqua permanens, as the alchemists called it, that can be used and distributed among peoples for their benefit, for their consideration. And I'm thinking that this could be a gift, actually, to future generations, if we can refine and distill the essence of democracy and pass that along to our children and grandchildren and so on down the future generations. Third question he sent was, why put democracy on the couch? Well, it's precisely for this reason. If you're living a fantasy life and you go into analysis, there's an attempt to dissolve that fantasy life and that fantasy world in favor of something more realistic, something more real. If you live in fantasies, you're either depressed or you're inflated. You're not very well oriented to the world around you. What you do and think isn't effective. And so you try to come to a better understanding of yourself and other people, and in this way to become more highly functional and successful and can be able to contribute to the culture around you. So that's why I think it's important to put democracy on the couch as well. It's sick. Democracy as we're living it is not healthy. It has to be put through the grinder of the alchemical process and reconstructed, reformed, and lived in a different way, in a more authentic way. What that will be remains to be seen. But what we're living now, democracy doesn't carry very much conviction or meaning. Even though we go and vote, we know our votes get skewed and moved around by various forces, and we don't have much confidence in the outcomes, and we don't like the outcomes usually. Finally, how can analytical psychology help us to understand today's polycrisis? Well, I think if we take a psychological approach to the crises that we're living, polycrisis means many crises. If we take a psychological approach and we try to get to what is the fundamental problem that's creating all these crises, maybe we can make a diagnosis. So what psychologists do, medical psychologists or analytical psychologists in their treatment programs, is they make a diagnosis, try to figure out what's wrong, what are the complexes that are interfering with better functioning, and take apart the fantasies that are interfering with good ego functioning. We want to improve ego functioning. We want to improve the actual lives of people and to make the world a better place for everybody. That's the goal of, I would say, the big goal of psychology as a profession, to bring consciousness and individuation to the world, to individuals and to the collective. This is a big project. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of thought. It's the psychological approach to the problems that the world is facing today. So not only individuals, but vast collectives are in difficulty, and the world is not well. So can we make a diagnosis, formulate a treatment plan, and see what can come out of that? I would hope to be a part of that as long as I still live. And I want to thank Stefano for organizing this conference, which I think is a contribution in precisely that direction. Thank you, Stefano, and I look forward to seeing you all at the conference in May.